God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Good to have you guys here today. You know, with COVID, there was this interesting thing that happened to anybody who's married, pretty much. And that is all of a sudden, we were at home a lot more with our spouse. And, you know, if I had asked you before COVID, if you spent more time at home with your spouse, would it be a problem? And I think, 99 out of 100 would say, no, that's great, it's fine. But after however many months you were at home with your spouse, you realize, this is a little different game than I signed up for, perhaps. Now, some of you, have a great marriage. Some of you are already in trouble. So this is something that you were dealing with already. But for a lot of people, all of a sudden, being at home was new. And that happens at various points in our lives, especially when you get older, maybe retirement, things like that. It's something that we don't think about until you have to think about a lot of times, which, like I said, COVID was the season. So today's authors, I actually wrote a book before COVID that all of a sudden was very relevant during COVID. It's called Spouse in the House, and the authors are Cynthia, Ruchti, and Becky, Melby. And they address these issues that maybe you're still dealing with, or you know someone who's dealing with. So, a little bit of a niche conversation, but if this is what you're going through, hugely important. Cynthia and Becky, great to have you guys on Life Today Live.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, it's a joy.
Great to have you back, Cynthia, by the way. It's been a while since you were on the program.
It has several years, in fact, but this is fun to have another conversation about a different topic.
So I guess the first question would be, which of you had a really tough time with your spouse that made you want to write a book about this? Is that even a right question?
Can we both raise our hands?
Really? So this is something that you guys had experienced firsthand?
This really started just with phone conversations. We were just trying to hold each other up and encourage each other and find ways that we could deal with this with a lot of grace. And then as we kept talking, we realized we're not alone.
So, I mean, now that can sound like a negative thing, but neither of you are saying that your husbands are terrible people, right?
We did the right thing. We married good men. That was our first wise choice, was we married good and godly men. And the joy of that was that they're both a joy and a negative. The joy of it was that we had a foundation of love and respect for one another. But then when times change and the house seems like it's not quite big enough to hold enough oxygen for both of you, that can create some issues for just about anybody, and even for a marriage that is basically solid. I think both Becky and I would say that there have been seasons in our marriages where we weren't handling things necessarily in good ways, and our attitudes needed a little adjusting. And that certainly came to bear at this time when our husbands were approaching or in retirement, and then when circumstances of life kept us in the house together 24/7.
Yeah, well, you should tell them to go into ministry because there's no retirement in ministry, apparently.
This is true.
Diana, Judy, good to have you guys. And everyone else who's watching, you're welcome to be a part of the conversation, by the way. Chat is open. Becky, let me ask you this. What are some of the, as you talked about this with Cynthia and now with many others, what are sort of the most common issues that come up when you find yourself in a lot closer quarters, even with someone you love?
I think one of the biggest things for me and for a lot of other women is, especially if you've been the one home or working from home while your spouse is out of the house, is I tended to think of everything as being mine, my time, my house, my space. I could eat lunch when I wanted, eat what I wanted. I, was writing. So I would move my laptop around the house, and in between I'd do laundry, and I could fold laundry on the kitchen table. Yeah, just had everything was pretty much me, mine. And when my husband came home, as delighted as I was to have him there, it was a huge adjustment, and I had to realize I had some selfishness problems that I needed to address.
Is it really selfishness, or Cynthia? Do you think sometimes it's just you get into a groove, you get to a routine, and any disruption in that routine, even if it's not a bad person, a bad disruption, it's a disruption.
I agree. I think that often is the case, that our routines or our habits or what we've grown comfortable with, and the same is true for our husbands as well. Their routines, and many times these days, it might be the wife who is the one retiring, coming home. Maybe the husband has been work at home for a lot of years, or that timetable of when they change careers or shift their career path may be different. So whichever one has been the person who has kind of had the roam of the house, so to speak, and the other one comes into the situation, it's oftentimes that idea that it feels as if someone is now looking over your shoulder. Every decision you make, every move you make, every change in the schedule, every time you want to put your feet up or plow through or make a phone conversation, there's a presence there that, as much as you love having that presence there, it changes things.
Yeah. And I know this happens with a lot of people, especially when you get older. Maybe someone in your family, a sibling, loses a spouse, and so they move in with you, and maybe just kind of taking care of each other. But I got to tell you, this happened to me and my wife just a couple of years ago, when my son had gotten married, and their living arrangements, you've got rents and apartments and things, and the overlap, and they were in a position where they needed a place for a month, and we're like, come on, stay with us, we'd love to have you. 7 months later, they moved into their apartment, and so there's this. And by the way, they were great. There was, but it is a disruption. It's a change in your norm, and I can see real quickly how that would spark over. What's the best way to maybe approach that when we find ourselves in that new normal? Is there a way to start a discussion, maybe?
Well, we've often said that before you get married, you go through premarital counseling. You meet with a pastor or counselor, and they ask you questions so that you can talk about your budget, how you'll raise your children and discipline them, any religious differences you have. And then we go through decades probably with careers and raising children, and you're different people. If you're retiring in your 60s, maybe even if you're, choosing to work from home in your 40s, and then the kids are home. So communication sounds cliche, but it really is the key. And it might mean, we've talked a lot about how one thing you don't want to say is we need to talk, because that tends to terrify either spouse. But just, take a walk, go for a drive, and have a list of questions. So now that we're both home more, who's going to empty the dishwasher? What do we want to do for fun? And if you've got children at home, include them in that discussion. Get them to talk about what fun things we want to do together now that we have more time. And then also how we divide up our space and our time and our chores. But just talk. Don't assume you know what the other person is thinking.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty a little bit of assuming that the other person is a mind reader. And Cynthia, I find that usually when I get in trouble, it's because I assume something. What are some of the things that you had to discuss your way through in your situation?
That's a great question. And I was going to add to that idea that an unexpressed expectation is a dangerous thing.
Boy, that's true.
So if we have expectations for one another and we assume they're going to happen, that is it's a bomb waiting to explode in your household, or to create chaos, or at least to create disappointment. And then sometimes that disappointment can fester and become something even uglier than that. So I think for us, there were some expectations that we needed to talk about, my husband and myself, and that ranged from our sleep schedules. My husband likes to go to bed early. I'm a night owl. And some of that is because that's the only time I can be alone and have a thought that I can take all the way to the end, or have a little bit of quiet time. He likes to eat breakfast early in the morning. I prefer to kind of ease my way into the day. And we needed to actually have discussions, not only about those kinds of things, but about what we expected for leisure time, but also work and ministry time. And I'll put it that way because one of my husband's gifts is to be a helper to others in need. We have a couple elderly women in our neighborhood that he enjoys helping. It may mean that there's a loose nail in the floorboard in my deck, but I'm overjoyed that he's able to go and help the neighbor lady with her flat tire or with the loose floorboard in her deck. And figuring out then schedule-wise, all by itself, which one of us is the likeliest to want to have a set-in-stone schedule, which is the more flexible one? Which one of us can be more flexible? And where are the times when in our schedules there are the almost non-negotiables? Both Becky and I still work from home as writers, and with our husbands retired now, and through the situations where we were home together, whether they were retired or not, there was an actual discussion that had to happen regarding what's going to work for what you need and your schedule and what I need and my schedule, and those togetherness times too, so that it's intentional as opposed to just hoping they understand what it is we're going to need. That rarely works out.
Judy up in Canada, not too far from Wisconsin, but she wants to know if you ever thought about renting your husband out for people that need help. No,
it's a great suggestion.
We hit 30 years this year in marriage, my wife and I, and I got to tell you, I think probably my biggest mistake. I don't know. There's quite a few, so I got to kind of sort through these. One of my biggest mistakes, though, I realized many years ago, was that my expectations for my wife were unreasonable. I wanted her to be my everything, and we had 4 kids. I mean, so she kind of got a little bit going on already, and I really had to stop. And when I finally thought about it, I realized I'm putting way too much on her. And when you look for a solution, I realized, you know what? I think it's important that I have guy friends who are godly men that I can, go snow skiing with when my wife is like, it's too cold out there. She's from Florida. She's like, I don't want to be cold, And I'm like, well, I want to go, but I felt bad for going without her. And we finally reached a point where we're like, go, And she loves to go to the beach. And when I say go to the beach, I mean lay on the beach all day doing nothing, which drives me absolutely insane. And I don't like the sand that much anyway. And we realized, okay, she's going to go to Florida with her sister, or even my sister. She's done that. And they're going to lay on the beach for a few days. And then I'm going to go to Colorado, and I'm going to ski for a few days. And we have our friends, and we realize that's not a problem. That's actually healthy. And we make sure we spend time and we go on vacation together, so it's not like we're substituting together time for our friends. What's the balance, Becky, when you look at your expectations from your spouse versus, I think, a very legitimate need for friendships?
Absolutely. One of the things that I had to realize was that some of the expectations I was putting on my husband were things that only God could fill. I wanted him to be reading my mind, like you said. If I need a hug, he should know that, right? We're soulmates. He should just know. I should never have to explain that. He should understand that when he says what's wrong and I say nothing, that I don't mean nothing. And so having to, realize that God is the reader of my soul. He's the lifter of my head. He's the one who knows what I'm thinking or saying before I think it or say it. My husband is not that one. So there was that. And then what you mentioned about needing friends. We've realized that being home together so much, we run out of things to talk about. I become less interesting if I'm only with him. And going out for lunch with a friend. I went with a group of girlfriends to see La La Land. 15 seconds into it, I'm like, I'm so glad my husband isn't here. I loved it. He would have hated it. But I came home energized and had things to talk about. And he needs the same thing. He has a men's Bible study. He goes for motorcycle rides with friends, and then he comes home and he gets, to talk about what he did. So it's so vital. Plus, ideally, we each have that friend who has our back and cares deeply about the health and success of our marriage, not someone who's going to, commiserate and feed the fire when you're upset, but says, let's pray about this. Let's turn to the Lord. Let's come up with a grace-filled solution. Cynthia is that for me, and I'm so grateful.
Oh, well, that's nice. And y'all can work together as well. Cynthia, what do you see in the way of the healthy aspect of other people, and like Becky said, people who are pulling for your marriage? Because I think that is all the difference in the world.
It does. It makes all the difference in the world. And part of the wonder of it is we're each creating stories with our own lives as well as with our marriage. Our marriage is creating a story. And if we can come back together after having those times when we've enjoyed our own interests, our own hobbies, or our own crafting that we want to do, or the places we want to visit that our spouse may not necessarily want to. When we come back together, we have more stories to share together. One of the things that I found most tragic was when I sat at McDonald's at a fast food restaurant one day, and I saw an elderly couple that was many years they had been together. It was obvious. They sat there through their entire meal and did not say one word to one another. And my heart just broke for that. But it also was one of those moments of saying, I want to have conversations with my husband for the rest of my life. Now, I want them to be good, healthy conversations. I want them to be centered on the right things. But if I'm not continuing to learn in whatever interests me, and he's not continuing to learn and grow in whatever interests him, and when we come back together, we will have lived the same story. So there isn't as much that we can talk about that isn't actually a memory that's being rehearsed. So that, in addition to the way that another person can help our faith grow. Becky, as she mentioned, we are that safe person for one another in respecting each other's marriages and wanting them to thrive. And I always, after every conversation with her, I have grown in my faith, I've grown as a woman, and I've grown in my relationship with both the Lord and with my husband. That's the definition of something that really will have a positive input in our relationships going forward.
Yeah, no doubt. This is the book. It's Spouse in the House, and I'll show you a couple of websites that I'll put here in the chat too. This is Becky's website, beckymelby.com. And this is Cynthia's website. And you can see the spelling, Cynthia Ruchti. Ruchti, am I saying that right? I got that.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
.com. You can check out both those websites. I have a question, and let's see. Either of you could handle this one, I'm sure. But as people have been, because this book's been out for a month and a half now, what has been some of the responses that you've gotten from people that have read this and gone, thank God somebody said it, and it's helped them work through, whatever their situation is that's put pressure on them? Either one of you.
I think one of the things that has warmed my heart is that people are using this like a workbook. They'll say, I got out my highlighter, I have Post-it notes, I've, dog-eared the pages, and then shared it with my husband. Hearing people say, I thought we were handling things well, and now I realize, there's room for improvement.
We've also had readers who have said things like, I wish I had this when I was a newlywed, because I didn't know how to navigate being married and being one flesh with my husband without losing myself. So that was another element. Another comment that we often get is it's so refreshing to see it handled with humor, because this can be a subject that can be a tough one for just about anybody, whether they're young or old, have been married a short time or a long time. There's no shame. And in fact, there's great wealth in the idea that in marriage, if we don't keep learning and keep growing through the entire process, or if we run into roadblocks and think, oh, okay, that's it, the marriage is over, we can never resolve this, rather than knowing that God does have a plan, he has said something in his word that's going to help with this particular situation, then we're going to miss an opportunity for, again, more growth. And for me, one of the big things that did then come out in the book as well is the idea that I had, as much as I loved the Word of God, I had kind of applied a lot of the verses to everything else except my marriage. All the verses about kindness and tenderness and patience and thoughtfulness and in honor, preferring one another, and then realizing, wait a second, that works very well in a marriage relationship. Right. And that light bulb moment was an important one for me.
Now, we're talking very much, I think, in sort of the typical Christian marriage scenario where we kind of hit that transition period, something's changed. But, for some people, they're in a tough situation.
Yeah.
And a COVID or a retirement or someone moving in just makes it worse. How important, Cynthia, are boundaries in the home?
That's one of the things that we also want to make very clear. One thing is we are not experts. We've just been experienced in this idea of walking through marriage for many years. We haven't, either one of us, experienced what it's like to live in an abusive situation or in a place where we did not feel safe in our own home. And there's professional help that needs to be engaged if that's the situation. There are a lot of times when we may feel that what we're experiencing is intolerable, and it turns out it's not intolerable. That was our attitude toward it. But there are genuine situations where it's not right, it's not healthy, it's not good for you, and there needs to be not only professional help, but a very definite and clear boundary, which there are some additional helps at the end of the book. So we aren't starting from the premise either that you have to have what might be considered an ideal marriage for this book to be of any value. Mm-hmm. Every single marriage I know can use a little work, or a tune-up, or an adjustment, or, as we use that analogy, rearranging the furniture so we're not tripping over each other.
Right. And, the reality is life is a journey. We never get to a stopping point. And if you have, well, that's when you have, dinner with a zero conversation, which is not a good place either. So, I mean, this is just life, life and marriage. Becky, I'm curious how your husband responded to the book.
Cautiously at first, because both Cynthia and I, both of our husbands are named Bill, so we came up with nicknames. And my husband in the book is Dr. Snuggles, which I do explain in the book. And I got, as I said in the book, I had his tepid permission to use that.
I was going to say that would probably be my one objection, would be like, oh, come on,
But he did agree. And I think it was cautious at first, but as he started having input in the book, and I started asking, tell me a guy's point of view on this, I think we really both, he enjoyed the process of kind of working with us. So it turned out to be good.
Yeah. Cynthia, your Bill okay with this?
My Bill's name is Wonder Hubby.
Oh, God.
And I know, seriously, but if both husbands' names are Bill, how could we write a book that would keep that straight for the reader? So Wonder Hubby was a little intrigued when he would walk into church and someone would greet him as Wonder Hubby, and he'd roll his eyes at first, and now he thinks it's kind of cute, which is good. But he too was very blessed by the idea that we were inviting their opinions. Sometimes we would tell a story from our perspective and then tell the very same story from his perspective, from our husband's perspective. And there were a couple of times that were very much a turning point moment for us as we wrote the book and heard our husband's perspective. It might have been something like, well, this is how I felt when suddenly I wasn't leaving the house and coming home at the end of the day. Yeah. This is how I felt. Sure. Or there might be differences in opinion on any number of things. One day, a couple weeks ago, I walked into the kitchen and he was standing there with this beautiful grin on his face. And I looked at him and he said, I unloaded the dishwasher. And I said, well, thank you very much. And he said, I read the book. Okay. So they have appreciated the fact that we not only have tapped into experts in marriage and marriage counseling for the book, but also tapped into the guy's perspective. Yeah. We knew that if we were writing it just from our own perspective, we were going to miss something very valuable.
You know, I pulled that one time where I'm like, honey, I ran the dishwasher last night. You'll be so proud of me. And she's like, no, I'm saying I unloaded the dishwasher. And she said, I hadn't run it yet. And I'm like, but they were wet. And she's like, that was from rinsing them in the sink before I put them in. So, you know, but that's life. We do our best. Yeah. We had just some closing words from both of you. And Becky, I'll ask you to go first. What do you say to that person who's like, you know, they're kind of watching this and they're like, I'm glad they worked it out. I don't think I can ever work this out. You know, it's just, to use your word, annoying, you know, inconvenient. This is just, I can't get to the place that they're at. What would you say to that person who's at that point of frustration?
I would say, can you look at your marriage as a ministry? Can you embrace the idea that this person in your house is God's gift to you, but also a mission that he's given you? There definitely are cases where things are just too difficult and you need to get outside help. You need a mediator or counseling. Mm-hmm. But in those, just, you know, this is frustrating, this is annoying, I don't really feel like working it out. That was one of the things that turned me around. Was I felt the Lord saying to me in one of my kind of whining times, can you love him for me? And when I thought of how God has, you know, been so incredibly patient with me over the years and forgiven me and given me grace and mercy that I didn't deserve, it changed that perspective. Yes, I can do the hard thing. I can say I forgive you. I can give a second chance because I've been given that.
Yeah. Cynthia, what do you say to that person that's just feeling despondent over their situation, whether it's a husband or whether it's other people, just the whole disruption? What do you say to them?
I think there is a lot that I would want to put my arm around that person and say, yes, I've been there. I've been there too, and it wasn't all that long ago. We all go through seasons sometimes. It might be a long season, a long stretch. It might be an afternoon. It might be years worth of thinking, I'm not sure this is going to work out, but I know it's supposed to work out. Now what do I do? I'm not sure I want to do that. That sounds either too hard or I shouldn't, oughta, have to. So there was an attitude adjustment in my own heart as I came to see, and here's the real point, as I came to see that if I took God at his word, and if I began to love like he would, there is a response from the other person, whether that is a coworker or your mate or another family member. The response from the other person when they see that kind of love, that kind of overt love and forgiveness and care and tenderness and respect, there is a built-in response that then winds up with having the peace-filled house, even if it isn't perfect, but that peace-filled house that you always longed for.
That's good. So good. Thank you both for sharing. I appreciate both of your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thanks for hanging out. If you're that spouse in the house, you got that spouse in the house, or any other disruption in your life, and you're like, I just need a little bit of a lifeline, there's the book for you. It's available right now, Spouse in the House, wherever you buy books.
Possible.
And you can check out their websites as well. It's in the chat. Appreciate you hanging out. We'll see you next time right here on Life Today Live.
Given us the will to choose to come, to choose to bend our necks, to choose to bend our necks, and to choose to learn, It is always possible to do the will of God. Nobody can prevent you from doing the will of God.